Well, thank you, Tristan, and thank you for all of the years of leading up OpenStack efforts down here in Australia. Tristan was one of our original board members, and somebody that definitely put lots and lots of effort into building the community. And the foundation staff is very small, and we depend on volunteers all over the world who really work in the community to help pull these and other events off. As Tristan said, I'm Jonathan Bryce. I'm the executive director at the OpenStack Foundation. I did just fly in. I was on an airplane about an hour and 30 minutes ago. It was late. It wasn't supposed to be that tight, but I made it, so it all worked out fine. As some of you may know, OpenStack does a release cycle that's time-based. Every 6 months we do a release, and around the same time we get the community together somewhere in the world for what we call the OpenStack Summit. Our most recent OpenStack Summit was in Austin, Texas, and it was a very packed house there. It was also the site of our very first summit when we formed OpenStack in 2010. At that first event we had 75 people. So, just a fraction of what we have here today. Last week in Austin, we had 7,500 people in about 5.5 years. And this isn't totally true. The slide looks really nice when you can go from 75 to 7,500. It was actually 7,800 by the end of the week. But, the point stands, lots of growth. And the thing that's really cool is how global the community is. We had 62 countries represented there, people from all over the world, similar makeup to what we have here, where we had technical participants, we had C-level executives, we had operators who are running OpenStack clouds, application developers who are building on top of public clouds, private clouds. So it's a really interesting event and a really important part of the OpenStack community. We always announce things around the summit, and so I wanted to go through some of the news items that came out of the summit and also talk about some of the themes that we heard from different users that were there at the event and give you guys an update. How many of you were in Austin? I know a couple of you were. Yes, okay, so good. So one of the things that we launched that I was really excited about was individual certification for OpenStack administration. Whenever I talk to anybody, whether it's about OpenStack or cloud in general or containers or any of the kind of new ways of doing development, the biggest challenge that I think most of us face is finding talent. Finding people who understand these new technologies and who can actually apply them in a useful way in our business. So this is what we have done to try to do our part in the ecosystem of cloud. We've created a certification for operating OpenStack clouds. We launched this last week. We had 80 people, I think 82 people who took the certification test, and we're getting their results back this week. And we're going to have thousands more who are going through this process, and it's going to deliver a certification where if you are needing to run an OpenStack cloud, you can know that these people have a baseline of knowledge about it. So it's a very important piece of the work that we've been doing at the foundation for a little over a year now. And we have, I think, 22 companies who offer training that are also tied into this certification. So if you are an individual and you want to add a highly in-demand job skill to your resume, you're able to find training that will prepare you to pass this. The other thing I mentioned that we do our releases every 6 months, and the most recent release was codenamed Mitaka. It was the 13th release of OpenStack. It was developed by our community, and there were over 2,300 developers that contributed to that software. That's in a 6-month period. So if you think about what that means as a user, as a consumer of OpenStack, that's a pretty big software development team that you have working for you and improving the software that you're running. And if you're a developer, it's pretty awesome to join a team that's that large and globally distributed and filled with experts in all kinds of technologies that are really exciting today. 345 different organizations were represented among that, and there's a lot of diversity in that. There are definitely a lot of technology companies, but there are also a lot of research organizations, as well as people that are just operating OpenStack environments and contributing back to it. So it's really cool to see that. That was the 13th release. And the thing that has been, for me, really exciting to see is how much we talk now about scaling and managing OpenStack environments and user experience. In the early days, there were a lot of features that we needed to get in just to get to a baseline level of functionality. But over the last year, there's definitely been a trend to making the OpenStack software really useful and easier to manage, deploy, and scale inside of public and private clouds. And I think that's a really critical point for any piece of software to hit. And for me, I think that ties back to the fact that we have this broad community with people who are running it that are directly involved in the development process. And Tom and David, whom Tristan introduced a little earlier, actually lead up a lot of our community efforts among operators and application developers, and they work to get them tied directly into that process. So if you are in that world and want to figure out how to get more involved or how to influence where the software goes, you should definitely hunt down Tom or Flanders today. Another thing that we do every 6 months is we do a survey of OpenStack users, and we release the latest one a little while before the OpenStack Summit. One of the biggest stats in there was that 65% of the deployments that were cataloged in that survey are in production now. And this is a 33% increase in just a year. And this was across about 1,100 different organizations that completed the survey this time around. It was the most respondents that we'd ever had. Again, we do it every 6 months. And so it was great to see not only more OpenStack clouds. There were over 2,000 that we've cataloged over the last couple of years through this survey, 2,000 individual ones. But to see not just more of them, but that they are moving into production and being used for really important workloads. We also ask people, why are they choosing OpenStack? What kinds of things are important to them? 97% picked a set of standard APIs on top of different kinds of technology as one of the key business drivers for why they were using OpenStack. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. Another thing that we talked about in Austin, we actually launched it last year, but have been adding a lot of products and services, is the OpenStack Powered program. The OpenStack Foundation is a nonprofit, and so we try to run programs that encourage consistency and standardization across the entire ecosystem, as well as collaboration and involvement from the community. This was something that we launched to try to encourage consistency at the API level and the behavior level across OpenStack environments. So that if you write an application for one OpenStack cloud, with minimal effort, you're going to be able to run it in a different OpenStack cloud. Not perfect at all yet. We just launched this last year, but it's been a really important program that has helped to focus interoperability as one of the key tenets of the OpenStack community. And in fact, the developer community really got behind this year and recently changed the core mission statement that we have for OpenStack so that it would include interoperability as one of the fundamental tenets of what we're all working on. So OpenStack Powered is a program that represents clouds that have passed a set of tests to verify their functionality and their APIs to make sure that they meet a minimum baseline of capabilities and behavior. So that is if you're looking for OpenStack products and services, that's an important mark to look for. Another stat, half of the Fortune 100 now runs OpenStack in some capacity. This is particularly fulfilling for me because just a couple of years ago, people were saying that OpenStack would never be used for serious workloads and things like that. Pundits love to make bold statements like that, but we see these deployments all over now in all kinds of use cases, and it's really exciting to see it's being used for real workloads in real organizations. And we have dozens and dozens of users that talk at our summits. This is an interesting set to me for a couple of reasons. Walmart, AT&T, China Mobile, State Grid Corporation of China, and Volkswagen. Each of these companies is the largest company in the world in their market, and they are all using OpenStack. Several of them keynoted, and each one of them, we hadn't coordinated this. It was just something that I ended up noticing as they gave their keynotes, but they all talked about how OpenStack was actually strategic to their business. And I have some info from some of them as we go through the presentation. I'll touch back on it. But the scale of these companies is massive, and collectively, they represent over $1 trillion of revenue and billions of customers around the world who are interacting with systems that are powered by OpenStack. So this is software that really has started to make a mark globally around the world. Other users that were there, we kind of categorize them into a few different categories: enterprise, private cloud, public cloud, telecom and network functions virtualization, and research and big data. And we had great companies in each of these categories that talk at the summit. We have companies who are here talking today. I think Bank West is speaking, Australian companies in each of these categories as well. But again, it just speaks to the diversity of what people are doing with OpenStack and how they're using it, and that's so exciting to see. Public cloud, we have had actually a big pickup in the last 6 months or so in public clouds launching on OpenStack. There was some news about 2 months ago from Europe. There were 3 public clouds that were making news there. Europe has really strong rules and laws around data sovereignty. I know that's a concern here in Australia as well. And there are public clouds in the United Kingdom, in Germany, in Sweden. There's a set of clouds that form the Cloud Team Alliance from 6 different countries that won a European Commission tender. So it's cool to see all of this momentum. And globally, we have dozens of public clouds now, including here in Australia, in New Zealand, across Asia, throughout Europe and the Americas as well. And one of those clouds that was on that previous slide that has an OpenStack compute cloud was DreamHost. And to talk for a couple of minutes, I wanted to bring up the ex-CEO of DreamHost, who is now the executive chair of Aptera. He was also a longtime board member for the foundation. So help me welcome Simon Anderson.
Thanks, Jonathan. How's it going? I'm Simon Anderson. I'm an Aussie, actually, but I've lived in California for about 15 years. And I'm just going to take a few minutes because I've been a part of now 4 companies that are different parts of the OpenStack ecosystem. And really as a word of encouragement to whether you're a company that is a subsystem that's trying to plug into OpenStack and enable the platform to a greater degree, or whether you're working on OpenStack specifically, strong encouragement to get involved because there's a lot of different ways you can play. On my part, as Jonathan mentioned, I was CEO of DreamHost for 5 years. How many of you heard of DreamHost before in the audience? Probably a lot of early developers who started 10, 15 years ago, because DreamHost has been around for quite a while, web hosting company. And when I went in 2011, basically I was charged to take DreamHost into cloud services. So we looked around to pick a platform, and at the time there were a number of different open source platforms that we could have gone with, but we really got involved with OpenStack. And since then, it's been a great journey. Now, DreamHost has one of the leading public clouds, and in terms of performance, which is something to hit on, that as Jonathan said, 3 or 4 years ago, there were concerns about can you really build a public cloud based on OpenStack, and can it be performant, and so on. The latest testing data out of Dream Compute, where we've implemented solid-state drives for storage. Ceph is the storage system that we use for block storage, which I'll talk a little bit about as well, and then some really interesting flexible networking as well. It's a public cloud that essentially is comparable to the EC2 capabilities of Amazon or the capabilities of Azure and so on. And VM boot times are under 30 seconds, that sort of thing. So it's definitely something you can build incredibly powerful public cloud infrastructure on. And so if you think about going down that path, happy to talk to anyone about that. On the second front, I mentioned Ceph. I was part of the founding team of Inktank, which built a company around the Ceph distributed storage system. And so this is encouragement, I guess, for those of you in the audience who are part of systems vendors, software vendors who are really wanting to get involved in the OpenStack community. We were able to very quickly get involved in the community and get users starting to test Ceph for block storage and in some instances, for object storage as well. OpenStack, of course, has Swift, the object storage, which is fantastic. But over a fairly rapid couple of years, we went from sort of zero adoption within the OpenStack community to about 50 or 60% of all clouds using Ceph for block storage in the community. And so, and now Inktank, the company, is now part of Red Hat. That happened a couple of years ago, almost exactly. And so the software has continued to be developed and really built for OpenStack clouds as well as other use cases. And so that's a good example of, if you're part of an organization that's trying to get into the OpenStack community, absolutely it can happen. Very welcoming, and lots of different ways you can get in. And then in terms of extensibility, I'm also part of another company called Akanda that I co-founded, which built a networking project called Astara, which is part of OpenStack, which extends the Neutron networking functionality. And so that's another example of being able to bring technology to the OpenStack community that ultimately becomes a part of OpenStack and what's called the Big Tent. And then finally, I'm super excited to have been working with Tristan and the team at Aptera for the last few years on an advisory basis, but I'm stepping up to be executive chairman of Aptera to really help the team continue to build out and help other companies build out clouds around the world that are based on OpenStack and migrate to OpenStack and so on. And what I've seen through Aptera and other companies like that is that OpenStack is really hitting this power zone of manageability and scale that, the early days of the challenges around that are really starting to dissipate. And a lot of that's come through very significant efforts within the community of of developers and smart product leadership from major corporations across the spectrum, whether it's AT&T, Intel, Dell, and a whole host of smaller organizations who've really brought much more of a prescriptive, okay, here's the areas where we really need to improve OpenStack and focus on it. And so there's a lot of ways that as users or participants in the community, you can get involved. There's a product working group. There's a user interface project and group now as well. So there's lots of ways, if that's your interest, whether it's personally or through your organization, that's another great way to get involved in the community. So OpenStack has it all. It's got performance, it's got pluggability, it's got manageability, it's got extensibility, and we're only 5 years in, a little over 5 years in, and I'm super excited to see where things go from here. So thanks for your time, and I'll turn it back over to Jonathan.
Thanks, Simon. So he actually led into some of the things that I want to talk about. Just real quick, more users in these other categories that spoke. All of the videos from the OpenStack Summit are online. You can go to openstack.org/summit and watch every session. There are, I think, over 400 videos there now, something like 50 terabytes of video that we generated. So lots and lots of information from the summit that's available, and you can drill into whatever category you want and hear from all of these organizations. This is some of the research and academic organizations. Tom, who is now at the foundation, he used to operate the Nectar environment here in Australia, which was one of our very early research environments for OpenStack. And we've had continued strong involvement in that arena, and lots of contribution too from these different organizations. If you want to learn more about some of these different categories, This is a little link slide for you that you can go to our website. We have research reports and white papers that go into in-depth case studies and reference architectures for different use cases. But what I want to talk about in terms of some of the trends, some of the ideas and themes that we are seeing, not just inside of OpenStack, but kind of overall, is how there is a lot of disruption happening in the technology industry. And OpenStack is part of that, but it's really a lot bigger than just OpenStack. And disruption, can always be scary. That's often the way that we think about disruption is somebody's going to come in and disrupt us and eat our lunch and cause us to have big problems. But really, when you're in a time of disruption, that's when you have the greatest opportunity to take advantage of a change and accelerate, create new value, meet a new need, and really have a step function inside of your organization. So, I think that without a doubt, there are disruptive technologies that we face right now. But what we should think about is how do we take advantage of that? If we look at our IT environments, they are continuing to become more and more diverse. It's not an environment where we buy from a single vendor and we get all of the hardware, the software, and the support from one shop anymore. Most people, they have a mixture of even just storage systems, a mixture of networking equipment, variety of software, different kinds of virtualization, open source. It's very much a mix and match kind of world out there. And so we need a strategy for how to take advantage of that diversity in our IT environments. When I had that stat earlier that said 97% of people said that standard APIs on top of a differentiated set of technologies was one of their top reasons for choosing OpenStack, one of the things I realized is that for a lot of organizations out there, OpenStack is actually a strategy that they are using to take advantage of that diversity, because it supports so many different technologies. Again, on the storage side, the networking, containers, virtual machines, bare metal, whatever type of form factor you might have there, there's a plugin that works with OpenStack in some way. And so you can put some sanity into your data center with technologies like OpenStack. So, if we look at disruption, I think that diversity is a big theme, and we want to take advantage of it. So looking at different users, I have put together 3 keys that I think are really important if you want to take advantage of diversity and not just end up getting disrupted. The first one is to pick standard platforms. You need to be able to have some standardization in your IT environments so that you're able to choose the right technologies for the right job. And I think that OpenStack is definitely one of those layers. But what OpenStack is focused on is really infrastructure, compute, storage, and networking. Automating those, providing a set of standard APIs to manage those. The good news is that every application out there has to process, store, and move data. It has to take advantage of compute, storage, and networking. So that is a very broad use case and something that OpenStack enables many, many things to run on top of it. But I think that if you look at how environments are today, they're kind of layered. You have infrastructure primitives, the compute, storage, and networking. This is definitely where OpenStack is very focused. But often on top of that, we have application primitives. That might be an orchestration service or database as a service or different tool sets that tie into a CI/CD pipeline. OpenStack does some of that, but there are other components that come into play here as well. And then, of course, for people who are really trying to accelerate development, cloud native, that's the current term for it. But that's the level where you get to not even thinking about what's underneath the hood, what is it running on. You're really writing to a framework like a Cloud Foundry or Kubernetes or Mesos or something that really abstracts away all of those other pieces. And the reality is that there's no perfect framework at that level. And before we launched OpenStack, I had created a company that became the Rackspace Cloud. And our first product was really a platform that was hosted we in a few years ended up onboarding over 600,000 applications, Linux and Microsoft applications that were running on there, pushed a lot of traffic. But what we found is that almost always, as those applications grew, people would need something that did not quite fit into our standard platform model. You know, they might need to do a video transcode, or they might need to do a specific type of encryption, or something that, you know, we weren't willing to run broadly across our whole fleet at the platform layer. And so in those cases, you know, we would give them the option to have a virtual machine that they could tie in and you know, have on a network. And so, you know, this is one of the things that I've seen is that there, you know, a diversity of workloads, and that's really what drives diversity in the data center. So you have to pick standard platforms at all of these layers. One of the speakers that we had who keynoted was Nayaki Nayar, who is at SAP. SAP is obviously one of the largest enterprise software companies in the world. They have built out an internal OpenStack Cloud that they are migrating a couple dozen different systems, different cloud systems that their different software applications run on internally. They're migrating those to OpenStack. They also have an architecture that they deploy SAP on for hosted SAP as well as on-premise SAP. And what's interesting is if you look at this slide that Nayaki showed us, this was for an industrial IoT use case. This is for running a factory that manufactures you know, big things. And inside of that factory, they have control applications, they have monitoring applications, they have inventory applications that are all tied together. And SAP is a big component of that. There's this is a production use case, by the way. There's a set of software from Siemens called MindSphere, and it sits on top of SAP's HANA Cloud Platform, which is based on Cloud Foundry, which runs on top of OpenStack. And this is, you know, a production use case for this manufacturing facility, but they use this same stack and change out things like the Siemens piece for different use cases. But the key here is that they have standardized on platforms at different levels that work for them, that give them the services they need to be able to plug into a manufacturing pipeline, to be able to run a financial services business, to be able to work with a global telecom. And because they have chosen flexible standard frameworks, they have a big head start, but also the ability to customize and to get the bits and pieces that they need for each particular use case. So you know, picking standard platforms is really key when you're talking about a diverse environment. If you have no standard layers, then it's just a giant mess and incredibly hard to manage and to scale over the long term. The other thing that's important to remember, everybody loves building new applications. You know, if you're a software developer, you love starting fresh and not having anybody else's ugly, buggy code that you have to deal with. And I know this because I have written lots of ugly, buggy code that people have told me they didn't want to deal with over the years. So this is, you know, I believe to be one of the great truths of software development. But when you are starting to create a new application, especially in any kind of established organization, a lot of the most valuable data lives in those old legacy applications. You know, financial services is a great example of that. But you know, there are other you know, organizations across every industry who have incredibly valuable customer data, inventory data, whatever it might be, that's tied up in some system that, you know, is not running in a NoSQL database that's ready to be containerized and managed by Mesos totally. You know, that's just the world that we live in. Now, if you're starting out and you're going to build a mobile app, then that's great. You can, you know, start in a nice framework that gives you a really agile, high-speed development throughput. But you have to figure out how do you scale those existing systems and how do you make sure that you can keep bringing them forward so that data is available. And so there are a few different modes that we have seen people operate in. A lot of times what happens is an OpenStack environment starts out in an organization and it's focused almost entirely on virtualization, software development, testing, some of those greenfield applications. As the team within that organization becomes more adept at running that kind of environment, then a lot of times they're able to find existing applications that they can port over and run inside of that environment. And so you end up with kind of different models of running applications inside of a cloud. Cloud hosted is when you forklift an existing application, you put it into virtualization, it runs mostly the same, you use a lot of the same processes to monitor, patch, manage the life cycle of that application. Cloud optimized is when either you're building a new application or you can modify an existing application to take advantage of the features of the cloud. That might mean that it can add extra capacity, it can scale itself out, scale itself down. That might mean that when there's a failure, it can provision new resources and have some aspect of self-healing in there. And then those new applications you can do in those cloud native systems that use very abstracted frameworks but give you a lot of velocity in your development. Mario Mueller is from Volkswagen, which is the largest car manufacturing company in the world. They have 12 brands. I was really hoping that he would bring a Lamborghini, but he could not fit that in his carry-on. But they have a lot of really cool brands. They have 900 different facilities around the world that where they have a footprint of some sort in their IT department. Their IT team, their IT budget, their IT fleet is as big as some of the global IT leading companies out there. I mean, they have a serious set of existing workloads. And what they are doing, and what they have already done, is to roll out OpenStack for, again, software development, testing, and some of those greenfield applications. And what they are now doing is they're starting to go through that process of identifying applications that are existing applications that they can move into a cloud-hosted model to take advantage of that footprint. And over the next several years, OpenStack is going to become the control plane for all of their data centers and all of their facilities globally. So the thing that's pretty cool about this is this is again a very industrial use case. This is not a startup. This is not somebody in Silicon Valley that is not accountable to performance requirements of a large organization, and they are making this move right now. When Mario talked, he had an interesting stat, which is that the average person in the U.S. spends about 37,000 hours in their vehicle across their lifetime, and he said that at Volkswagen, as they move into autonomous driving, self-driving vehicles, and these different shifts that are happening with transportation, they have a lot of work to do beyond just building safe, reliable cars. They have to figure out how the entire infrastructure of transportation is going to change and what the experience needs to be for people who are sitting in a car for 30,000, 37,000 hours across their lifetime is. So that is a lot of technology development that they need to enable. And this is why it became very imperative and strategic for them to invest in this kind of a system. The last point, and I really think that it's the most important point, and that is that all of these technologies are great, but ultimately culture is more important. The technology is absolutely critical to give you the capability, but if your culture is not ready to absorb it, not ready to take advantage of it, then the technology ends up not getting you anything. And I had a user that was telling me about their experience as they went through and deployed a cloud internally at their company. They were trying to speed up the delivery of new functionality to their customers. And from the time that the developers went code complete to the time that users were actually using that new functionality was 44 days from end to end. So it's not years, but it's still not very good. And if you were a developer and you're looking at a month and a half of time between when you finish something and when people are using it, that's kind of it really dampens your motivation. So they wanted to improve the processes and improve the technical piece. And they went through, they built a private cloud, rolled out all these services, finished it, and they were able to get that down to 42 days. And they realized that the problem is they hadn't changed their culture. For instance, in the new environment, it had the ability to do self-service. However, for any machine to be provisioned on the network, somebody had to sign a piece of paper still. Things like that were still in place. I had another IT guy that said nothing kills momentum like having to create a ticket. And that's what cloud is really all about, is removing those barriers so that you can just go straight to productivity. So they went back, they looked at all these processes, they got sign-off up and down the organization to try out a new continuous deployment process that had a lot of rigorous testing in there, and they were able to drop this from 42 days down to 2 hours. But that's the result that they were looking for. But the technology, absolutely critical, but could not get them there on its own. So the culture is such an important piece of this as we look at how to implement this. Saxena Sarab was from AT&T, and he spoke about how they are completely reworking all of the infrastructure that AT&T runs their carrier environment on. They started this a few years ago, and when they saw what smartphones were doing to their network. You want to talk about disruption. The data on their network in the last 7 years has grown 150,000%. 150,000%, and it's going to grow at least another 20x in the next 3 to 4 years. So those kinds of numbers, as he said, that the existing business model they had does not survive that kind of a change in usage patterns. And so they can't continue to buy hardware that gets developed on a decade cycle of product development that's supposed to sit in place for 10 or 20 years, that is extremely expensive and completely incapable of changing. So they're moving to a software-defined network. They built something called the AT&T Integrated Cloud. They started out with building this cloud for internal IT use for their enterprise, and have since expanded it to include a number of virtual network functions on their network. And their goal is to have their network 75% virtualized by 2020. They have already rolled this out in production. Last year, they rolled out 74 data centers in production in the US, and they have millions of their customers in the US right now on the AT&T network running through this AT&T Integrated Cloud. This is, again, all of these keynotes are online in the videos. Some of the numbers that he has in there are really impressive, and I'd encourage you to go watch the whole thing. But the thing that is also a critical piece of this is AT&T is one of the world's largest employers. And if you think about the skill sets that their existing employees have, they are built around decades of usage of a different type of technology. So they have offered training to every one of their employees. And what's really interesting about it is, if you are currently maintaining, routers in mobile towers, you can be trained on the software-defined version of that and how to run that as well. Or they also offer things like big data analytics training, and you can move, into different parts of the company. They're basically opening up a lot of opportunity internally, and really trying to very dramatically, make the point that this is not just a technology shift, but a culture shift. And just on that point, why is big data analytics so important for them? They are collecting petabytes of data every day from dozens of monitoring metrics on every foot of optical fiber that they have across the US. It's pretty cool to see what they're doing with that. And they're able to now predict, based off of different performance characteristics, when sections of fiber may start to fail, may start to have degraded performance, and really get into a predictive mode of managing their network. So, technology, really important piece of it, but also managing the culture for the organization is really critical too. So all of these companies, they're working to satisfy competing priorities from reliability and stability so that they can embrace diversity and win these disruptions. The other theme around disruption that we saw come out of the summit last week, and that we've seen, really, I think, on a global basis as well, is how demand for infrastructure overall is exploding. Mark Collier gave a keynote on day 2, and he talked about some of these points that I'm going to go over here. But a lot of this is driven by how many devices are connected to the internet now. One of the other things that AT&T said is that they now have more devices joining their network that are not human interfaced than are. So they have more things like cars and Nests and things like that than phones and tablets, which is pretty interesting, and that's only going to grow. And some estimates say that there's going to be 50 billion devices online globally by 2020. Again, all of these applications, all of these devices, they have to process, store, and move massive amounts of data. And a lot of these devices don't have the computing capacity and the storage capacity to do that locally. So they need to be connecting to systems inside of companies like SAP and AT&T. They need to be connecting to systems that are running in public clouds. And one analyst put together some data around this, and he estimated that we might need 400 million new servers to handle that. That's a really big number. And it seems high to me, but let's say that it's only half that. That is still an incredible number of servers. And you just cannot manage that type of hardware in the way that we did 10 years ago. You have to think about, again, systems. How do you manage these things in an automated way that you can scale and really get the most advantage of a fleet rather than thinking about them as individual nodes. So where OpenStack shines is really providing programmable access to servers. And that could be bare metal, that could be virtual machines, it could be containers or container orchestration systems. But you actually need a lot more than just OpenStack to really take advantage of it. And so the other theme that came out of this was really how we can't do this alone. We have to integrate with a lot of technologies, and we've talked about OpenStack as an integration engine before in terms of being able to tie into a lot of different types of hardware. But I actually think that what we're seeing is it goes beyond that at this point. If you think about what drove a massive explosion in terms of the number of web applications that were developed in the early 2000s, it was having freely available, widely available access to a fairly standard set of technologies, the LAMP stack. And yes, you could replace MySQL with Postgres. I liked Postgres better, personally. People picked on me, but I liked it a lot. And Apache, a lot of people use Nginx, whatever. But the point is that these were tools that were developed by different communities. Some of them have different licenses. Some of them have different processes for developing. But when you put them together, that is what really enables an explosion of innovation. So what's going to be the LAMP stack of the cloud? Mark asked this question last week, and someone wrote an article out of there saying, OpenStack's the LAMP stack of the cloud. It's the exact opposite of what he said. I think that OpenStack will be a piece of it, for sure. But OpenStack is not enough on its own. And to really understand what the LAMP stack of the cloud is, it's not something that we in the OpenStack community can answer on our own. It really depends on what users want to do, what users find valuable. So going back to that user survey, the top 3 things that are in the emerging technology area that people want to have work with OpenStack were containers, network functions virtualization, and bare metal. And if we look at just kind of the application side of it, what people are running right now, these are the most popular frameworks that people are running on top of OpenStack. So Kubernetes, Cloud Foundry, OpenShift, Mesos, Docker, Cloudify, a lot of other things. If you add all these up, it's more than 100% because people have diversity. They're using more than one of these. The point is that it's not just OpenStack. It's OpenStack plus a lot of other things. And we had a number of users that talked about what they're doing. Tim Pletcher's at Time Warner Cable. He runs their application group there, and they run Mesos on top of OpenStack. They run it in virtual machines right now. Their infrastructure team is provisioning Ironic, which is the OpenStack bare metal system, and they're going to be moving it over to bare metal in 2016. Jakub Pavlik, Colby Holzer. Jakub is building a smart city in the Czech Republic that uses Kubernetes and OpenStack. Kobe works for LivePerson, which is the most popular online chat system for customer service on websites. They're in a couple dozen data centers right now around the world, and they're using Kubernetes on top of OpenStack in production. And then what was really cool is, it's not just about what do you run on top of OpenStack, but it's how do you fit all of these together, again, like the LAMP stack, so that they become something that's more valuable. Craig McCluckey and Alex Polvey are both involved with the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. Craig he works on the Google Compute Cloud at Google. Alex is the CEO of CoreOS. And they showed how to run OpenStack services on top of Kubernetes to provide HA, recoverability, self-healing. It was a pretty cool demo that they did. And the point is that these services, they're not competitive. They're actually really additive. And as you put them together, you can build new, extremely valuable things. And that was one of the big themes through the whole week last week. And I think what we're seeing emerge in our community is this attitude of collaborate or die. No one can do it alone, no one community, no one company. And so we have to look around and see where the great technology is being developed and how to tie it all together. So just to wrap up, as I mentioned, it's a global community. We do these OpenStack days. This is the first one here in Australia. We have 20 plus others around the world. And if you're traveling and want to go to another one, there's a page on our website that has them all listed out. You can also find all of the meetups under our events section. But the best way, I think, to get involved in the community is to come to a summit. The next one is going to be later this year in Barcelona, and that's in October. And then following that, we'll be back in the United States in Boston. And then relevant for all of you, which we just announced last week, is that towards the end of next year, we will actually be coming here to Sydney. So we will be bringing the community here next November to Sydney in the beautiful new convention center, which I've gotten to see in its current raw state. They promise me it'll be done. But it's going to be really exciting to have everybody down here, and I'm very excited to be here today and looking forward to talking with as many of you as possible. So thank you for your time, and I will hand it over to Tom now.